Have you ever been making great progress healing your chronic pain and symptoms, and then everything flares up again? You immediately think, I've lost all my progress. This isn't working. If that's happened to you, this video might completely change the way you see recovery. Now, about 10 years ago, when I was recovering from chronic pain, I had one of the most discouraging moments of my entire healing journey. Now, at the time, I was probably 4 or 5 months into recovery. Most days, I was pain-free. I was back at the gym, I was lifting weights, I was doing cardio, and I was back working as well. So I felt great about my progress. I was super happy, my mood was lifted. I felt like I was going to be able to fully re-engage in life in no time. And what happened was I was going to go on a trip with my wife to see her extended family. This was the first time I was going to meet them. And the night before we went on the trip, I went to the gym and did a shoulder workout. And it felt great in the moment. I was lifting heavier weights. I felt confidence. But afterwards, when I was in the steam room, I felt the pain start to build. It started from my shoulder and went all the way to my fingertips. And I was really freaked out. I hadn't had this big of a flare in a really long time as I was recovering. And so when it was coming on, I was really scared. And then the next day I had to go on this trip to see my in-laws, and it was a stressful travel day. And my shoulder was just killing me for the next 2 days. And to be honest, I panicked. I freaked out because I thought, oh, I've lost all my progress. I'm going to have to start from square one again. And I don't know if I'm going to ever be able to fully heal my pain. Looking back now, I realize I completely misunderstood what was happening. That flare-up wasn't proof that I was failing. It wasn't proof that my body was damaged, and it wasn't proof that I wasn't going to recover. In fact, understanding why this flare-up occurred was one of the biggest turning points in my healing. Since becoming a therapist who specializes in treating people with chronic pain and chronic symptoms, I have seen hundreds of clients follow this pattern. They start to get progress using the brain-based approach. Then they have a flare-up. Then they freak out because they had a flare-up, and they think to themselves, I'm back to square one, everything is lost. But that's often not what's happening at all. In this video, I'm going to explain why chronic pain, symptoms, and nervous system dysregulation can suddenly get worse after you've been making progress. Why this isn't a sign that you're necessarily going backwards, and how responding the right way in these moments maximizes the chances of your brain and nervous system continuing to heal. I now realize when I started to have shoulder pain, it wasn't the end of my healing. In fact, it was one of the most important moments in my healing. And I've seen this play out with hundreds of clients. So why can your pain, fatigue, dizziness, or other chronic symptoms flare up after you've been making progress? The first thing I want you to understand is healing is rarely linear. People think it's going to be this straight line. They almost imagine this. This is high symptoms. This is no symptoms. And they imagine as they start the healing work, it will just go down nice and smoothly until they're at no symptoms. And so they imagine week by week, they're just going to feel more regulated and their chronic symptoms are going to fade out. But this is not how healing works. Real healing is messy. I will say that again. Real healing is messy. You're going to make progress, and then you're going to flare up. You're going to gain confidence, and then doubt yourself. You're going to have a few great weeks, and then a few awful days. And this is normal. Healing is messy, and it is definitely not linear. What I want people to start to do is zoom out. Stop tracking your healing day by day. Track it more in months. So if you zoom out at the last couple months of your healing, you'll probably find that you're still moving in the right direction towards eliminating your symptoms. But it's not going to look like this. It's going to look like this jagged line all the way down. And so remember to zoom out because you're going to get a better sense of if your healing is being effective. And this is where I went wrong with my shoulder example. I made the mistake of judging my entire recovery process based on one painful weekend with my shoulder. And so I focused so much on the one painful weekend and how I was failing that I ignored the months of progress that came before it. I made the mistake of not zooming out. Now, one of the biggest reasons symptoms flare up after you've seen progress is because your brain doesn't instantly erase all the danger and dysregulation it's felt for years. If your symptoms are neuroplastic, this means there's no damage or disease in your body causing your pain and symptoms. Your pain and symptoms are occurring because your brain has been stuck in this heightened state of danger. And so for years, your brain has been learning that certain positions are dangerous, certain movements are dangerous, certain activities or hobbies are dangerous. It starts to view all sensations such as pain or emotions inside as threatening. And it starts to view certain memories or other factors in your life as threatening. And so it's important to understand that for years, your brain has been learning all this danger. Now, as you begin to use exposure to approach internal sensations or external things, it's not like your brain's going to instantly say, oh, we're safe now. We're all good. No, what it's likely going to do at first is it's going to keep predicting that these things are dangerous. And as it does this, it's going to trigger pain and symptoms. Looking back on my shoulder flare experience, I realized there were a lot of things activating my nervous system. I was pushing my exposure to lifting more weight, something I had feared for years. I was traveling on a plane to a different province, and I hate traveling. It's very stressful for me. And I was meeting all my wife's extended family, which was making me feel really anxious. But at the time, I didn't see any of that. All I was focused on was the pain. And because all I focused on was the pain, I assumed something had gone horribly wrong. Now, here's the biggest mistake that people make when symptoms flare. Ironically, the flare is not the biggest problem. Our reaction to the flare is the biggest problem. And most of us, when we have a flare-up, we immediately start to catastrophize. They think, I've damaged my body permanently, I'm back to square one, I knew this wouldn't work. Then they stop exercising, they stop doing exposure, they stop doing the somatic practices, they start to research new physical treatments, they start to hyper-monitor their symptoms, and they constantly are analyzing if their symptoms are getting worse. From the brain's perspective, these behaviors communicate one thing. This must be really dangerous. And when your brain perceives danger, it will keep triggering and perpetuating your chronic pain and symptoms. And so by responding to your flare-up with a sense of danger, it actually starts to strengthen your pain or symptom pathways in the brain. If I could go back and sit beside myself at my aunt-in-law's house 10 years ago, I would simply remind myself that this makes sense, that flare-ups are a normal part of the process, that my nervous system just became activated, and that one flare-up is not going to erase all my healing, that I would get back on track and my healing would keep progressing forward. Most importantly, I'd remind myself to keep responding to my pain like I have been practicing for months, to keep creating safety using somatic practices with pain and emotions, to keep using safety signals to regulate my nervous system, to keep doing graded exposure to living life even if the pain is still present, and to create indifference to my pain, to teach my brain it's not that important, and to redirect my focus on living life. And finally, I'd remind myself to stick to the game plan, to stick to the brain-based healing, and don't get pulled off in all these different directions. And eventually, after 3 days of suffering with my shoulder flare-up, that's exactly what I did. I got back on track, and the flare-up was just one chapter in my story. So after working with hundreds of clients with chronic pain and symptoms, this is what I advise them to do during a flare-up. First, zoom out. Do not judge your healing based on today's symptoms. Zoom out over weeks or months and see if your healing is moving in the right direction. Second, remind yourself that symptoms are information, not necessarily signs that your body is damaged or diseased. Third, notice the urge inside to panic, get frustrated, or shut down about your flare. Notice the urge to Google. Notice the urge to hyper-monitor your symptoms. You want to be aware of that urge inside when it first happens and then redirect yourself. And you want to redirect yourself to doing something that's going to create safety. Start to do somatic work with your pain, symptoms, or emotions. Use safety signals. Go and do something pleasant, such as calling a friend or watching a funny TV show. Start to slowly re-engage with living life, even if you have symptoms. And so this is a very essential step. Notice the urge to panic and freak out, and then shift to creating some safety. Remember, healing doesn't happen because you never have setbacks. Healing happens because you learn to respond differently to your setbacks. So keep going with the healing work, and I'll talk to you all soon. Take care.